Oh, thanks, guys. Hey, thanks everybody for showing up. And we're going to be painting with gouache. And so many people who are watercolorists or oil painters or acrylic painters always are asking me, what is gouache? What is gouache? And how do I use this stuff? I've actually added it to my watercolors now because it is watercolor. It's just opaque watercolor. And they do make acrylic gouache, but we're going to be using the five colors. And of course, I think they sent you the picture that we're doing today. And we're going to go right into it actually right away. And the paper that you're using is the Stonehenge Aqua cold press. And they make it white and black. And they make 300 pound and 140. And so that's all great paper. And so that's what I'm representing right now. And so it's really fun. So let's squeeze out our paints first. And let me just show you the paints. Let me get to my tabletop here. Hold on, let's go to tabletop. And so these are the paints, and there's five colors. And it's amazing when I talk to my students, it's like, really, these are the only three colors you need to make a lot of different colors. Yes, it's nice to have like all those other colors, like, a lime green and lavender, which, is a great colors that Holbein has for the watercolor. And they also have them for the gouache. And they do have some of the same colors. And also, I wanted to let you know that if you do have a question that you want to just ask right away, just unmute yourself and ask it. I don't mind that. But you can also put it in the chat and they'll tell me too. So go ahead and ask questions. That's why I'm here. And so what we're going to do is just let's squeeze these out. So we're going to use gouache is opaque watercolors. And so what is the difference between watercolor and that is that they're ground more finely. They're really finely ground. And so they're like almost like they're concentrated so that you can cover things up and it just covers up really well more than like the transparent does, because transparent watercolor doesn't cover up, it's transparent, right? And so this is opaque. And so the permanent white I'm using, I'm going to just squeeze some out on my palette. So if you just squeeze it out while I'm doing it, you can do that. Just squeeze out some white. And I put them in order like this from light to dark, only because like if you put the black right next to the white, it's gonna mess that up. So I kind of go from light to dark, almost like a value, to the values from light to dark. And so I'm gonna put the yellow right next to that, and that's lemon yellow. And they have many, many different colors, and they have sets that are spring, summer, fall, and winter sets. I personally like to buy not in a set, I like to buy my colors that I like. And I tell my students that use colors that you like. I think, of course, you want to kind of get a red, yellow, and blue because those are their primary colors, but you can buy some secondary colors and just colors that you really love. So go ahead and squeeze these out, like I said. And
Um,
unlike
before
Holbein
you
watercolors,
gonna,
Holbein watercolors, when you squeeze them out, they never dry to a hard rock. They never dry to a hard rock because they don't use oxgall in their paints. Now this is a different, these have gum arabic, which the watercolor does too, but they have some kind of filler, which I'm not sure what kind of filler that is. I think it's to their company. They don't use whitening agents to make it opaque. They just ground it finer and have this special filler that they put in that's to their company. And so there's the five colors we'll use. And so let's just again ask questions, please. They're ground really finely and they're opaque. But we're gonna do two things. We're gonna do it like a watercolor and we're gonna use it like an opaque gouache. And because the fact that I want people to realize that this can be used like watercolor too. You can make these transparent and actually they're more concentrated, so they're a little finer pigment, so they go farther. And you'll see when we do the sky first, what we're going to do is we're going to wet it and use it like watercolor. And again, it is watercolor, but it's just opaque watercolor. And so we're going to use it with a wet into wet wash. And then we're going to get thicker and thicker as we go on. So I'm going to show you both ways of using it like a watercolor and using it like an acrylic and oil where you use it thick. So let's go ahead and draw this on here. And when it comes to drawing, this is a small size. And so if you want to take it and put it on a copy machine, 8.5 by 11, print it out and then trace it for, taking transfer paper and transferring it on there. That's fine. It's a pretty simple painting and pretty simple scene. So we're just going to draw that on there real quick, and I hope you have a pencil ready. And we're
I
just
have a
going to
quick
get
question. I don't know if
yeah.
this was did we have talk about the side of the paper that we're using?
Yeah, it's a Stonehenge Aqua White. Stonehenge Aqua is the brand that Legion puts out, Legion paper. And it comes
A-
in sheets, blocks, and it comes, different sizes. The full sheets are 22 by 30. It also comes in black, and I'm going to show you a couple of images later on of how we use it on black, on white paper. And I also mount this, and they actually, right now, they have coming out, they mount their paper onto aluminum panels. And so at the end of here, I'm going to show you how you can take this and frame it like a oil painting and frame it like an acrylic where you don't have to mat it and put glass behind it. I'm just going to show you little things how to do that and make your painting more valuable. Its
And
perception is that,
is
I'm
there a
sorry?
size? Is there a size of the like a side? There's a rough side and not so rough side. Which side do
I'm
you
sorry.
start
I thought
with?
you said size.
Sorry.
No, there isn't. Both sides are both, you can use either side. You can use either side of the paper. Yeah, they both have it's one seems like it's indented the pattern and one is like it's forward. And so you kind of decide, but either one you can use either side, definitely either side.
Thank you.
And so first thing I do when I'm drawing, and let me just I'm going to go to this value study first, 'cause I'm going to show you what we're going to be doing. So this is a value study. I always take all my images, my photos. Now, this is not a photo. I just made this up out of my head. So we don't have a photo for this, and so I'm just using my image, but I'm going to show you the lights and darks of it. So I kind of go in and make all my photos black and white and tell my students to do that too. And then we look for the light pattern, and basically the sky and the water and a little bit of the sand are my lights, and of course the sunlight is right in the middle, right behind the palm tree. And so that'll be our lights. And then our darks will be the trees and some of the waves. This little island back there, that's kind of a middle tone. And I'll put that more towards the dark, or actually more towards the light. I mean, I'm going to still keep it mid-tone, but I'm going to not make it as dark as the foreground here. So it stands back there. And so when you're drawing something, and I was an illustrator for like 35 years for doing storyboard illustrating for TV commercials, and everything is done out of your head. And so I'm putting out a book, hopefully pretty soon, on how to work from your imagination, basically. And so you use your mind's eye to look at things and take snapshots. And anyway, so you look at this picture and you go for the big, when you're drawing it up, you go for the big parts of the scene. You don't start with little things, you start with the big things. And so the first big thing I see is where the horizon line is. And so that's not halfway. I bring it down a little bit from halfway, put a line across, just put a little line across there. And then I have also then
David is working out of Wisconsin, so he might cut out every once in a while. He will be right back with us. Oh yes, no, they do have internet. He has a rough connection. He's working out of the Northwoods area. And yes, we will have him change his view to.
Yeah, it looks like he popped out to get back in.
It's a cheesy line, yes.
Could you ask him to put up his drawing?
Absolutely. We will
Thank
do
you.
that.
all right, I'm back. Am I back?
Yes, you are
You're
back.
back.
And sorry about that. I'm up in the North Woods and our Wi-Fi is very sketchy.
No worries.
David, can you
you
switch
get-
your view to to the image?
Oh, sorry about that.
No, that's great. Thank you.
All right, so here we keep on going. Sorry about that again. I told them in the beginning that that may happen once in a while because again, it's very, sometimes it goes really well and sometimes it doesn't. So there I'm putting a little triangle, right? And it's a little triangle there. And then my sun is gonna be in this 1/3. That's my center of interest. It's kind of like this tree and the sun right in the center here. So I'm gonna put a little dot there for the center of my tree. And I'm gonna bring a trunk of the tree over here to this part of the triangle and just do a little line over there. And you make this up. I mean, you don't have to do exactly. It's basically a couple palm trees, an island, the ocean, and the sunset, right? And so if you want to make it up a little bit differently, you go right ahead. That's fine. Because we're going to still use the right value pattern that I have, that these are going to be darkest and the background is lighter. And so I'm going to do the trunk of the tree here. I always do the big parts, like I say, I do these big parts first. So draw on your trunk of these trees. And then we're going to do the lines first. Before we get into the fronds of the tree, I again looking for the big parts. I'm looking for big things to put in there first. And so then the wave itself, I'm going to put a little line for the wave that's going on here. There's 1 or 2 or 3 lines. That's each individual wave that's coming in. It'll be a little bit dark right there when we do our painting. And again, this is a big triangle too. See, there's big rectangular shapes and triangular shapes. And so the sun, we don't have to draw in because it's gonna be the lightest light. And so we have to make sure that we keep away from this area and try to use the white of the paper. But the nice thing is this is not watercolor as transparent watercolor. So we are allowed to use white of the paint to make that come back. So if you do lose it, don't worry about it. We can always put in whites of the paint. We can use gouache to cover up. And that's the best thing about it. So now with this, some of these branches over here and the fronds over this tree, just going to kind of sketch them in real lightly, because some of this I'll make up with my brush and and that's going to be at the end. And you're going to see, we're going to go over this anyways with the first wash, because the first wash, even though we're using opaque colors, we're going to make them transparent. And so then we have a bunch of little trunks here. And do you have to draw anything in this triangle? No, because we'll make texture there later on. And do we have to do anything in the beach? No. Do I have to put the shadowing or the lighting for the light? No, I don't do that either, because we can do that on top. We don't have to even leave white of the paper for this reflection. We can just let that be and go through things with the paints. Now the fronds. And so what I like to do when I'm doing these palm trees is I do the branch by branch, or like so I'll take one out and I just put a line there. I'm not going to do the little fronds yet. I'm going to wait for that in a second. And so I just kind of put in these branches, because the branches, they all come up from one spot in here in the center, and they kind of go out. And so I just put these lines there first. And see, I'm just going to go around, like, don't try to even them out, make them perfectly even. Actually, you want to overlap some of them. And with the traditional way of like gouache, like if you're using like an oil painter where you're just using it very thick and you're just putting on, you almost draw with the gouache, you can do that too. But I'm showing you more of a watercolor procedure than it is like some of the oil painters that use gouache. Because some of the people who are gouache painters who have come from the side of oil painting, they don't even put a sketch on there with a pencil. They just go in there and put their darks down first. And that is possible, but I'm just kind of show you a little bit different way that a watercolorist could do, because we watercolorists tend to do our sketch first with our pencil. So here again, I'm putting these lines in for the branches. And then to put the fronds in there, what I do is I kind of put them underneath, and I just do a little bit like this. And even if you feel you can do them without this sketch, without the pencil sketch, that's fine. Because we're going to take our small little brush, this brush is very pointy. These Holbein brushes, Holbein gold brushes, are very, very sharp and pointy, especially new ones. And so here I'm putting the little fronds in there. And again, please ask questions if you have a question to ask. So just put it in there, and if I'm going too fast for you, you can always go back later on, when you're, because I'm not sure how fast everybody's going, but if you get behind a little bit, this is going to be recorded, so you can always go back into that area or into that time and get it again and look at it over and over again. And here we're going to put a little bit of the frowns in there. All right, so that's about it for me. So that's about all I'm going to put in. Just enough where I know the branches are going to be, where the trunks are, where the big lights and darks are going to be. And I squeeze out my paint, and so hopefully you've got your paint squeezed out and you're getting ready to paint. How's everybody doing?
Good.
So now we're just doing it with one brush, but if you have other brushes that you feel more comfortable with and that you feel that you want to use, there's no, this brush is not a magic brush. It's not going to be, if you have a favorite brush, go ahead and use that brush. It's okay. This is a brush that we sent you guys, and I actually have a set of these that I sell that are Becker art brushes. They're Holbein Golds. It's hard to find these because they're not really a brush company. And so they don't really sell a lot of these brushes, but they're very, really nice brushes. And so we're
David?
gonna, yeah.
Joyce has a question. She wants to know if gouache will cover over the pencil marks.
Yeah, yes, they will. Yes, absolutely. They're opaque. And so everything that's down there, and actually in my picture, my photo right here, the photo right there, you can see there's a little dot on there, and actually here's the actual original. So here's there's a little dot I spilled on there. And I was going to show you that here, I'm just going to use a little bit of white and yellow. And that was a mistake I made. I splattered and I couldn't get it to, I put a little water on it, but watch this. Oh, gone. It's opaque. And so that's what it's made for. It's opaque watercolor. And it's made to cover up and be opaque, not transparent. But the nice thing is that I can use it transparently. So that's what we're going to do with the sky. First thing we're going to do is wet the whole sky, and we're going to show you how to use gouache wet into wet. And so that it is like the normal transparent watercolor. So it is a really high concentrated pigment. It's so much pigment in there that you don't have to use much of that pigment because it's so finely ground. So I'm gonna get going here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wet the whole background. So I'm gonna take this brush, and then again, if you have a bigger brush that you want to wet the whole surface, that's fine. I find I can do a lot with whatever brush I have. It's like I'm just wetting it all. And I think that if you guys got 300-pound paper, it's not gonna buckle on you. But if you do have 140-pound paper, I suggest that you wet the back and put it onto a panel, like some kind of a plastic panel or something. And I just realized that this is going to reflect a little bit of the light here above me. So I'm going to put this underneath there and get that up a little bit so you don't see the fine. But see, I wet to the, I'm going to wet the whole thing. I'm going to wet the whole thing. The whole paper. I could spray it, but don't, if you have one of these misters to spray, these are really nice for wetting an area, but do not use this to first initially wet your paper because it doesn't soak in because it's a mist. And so it will not soak into the paper. It's good after you wet it with your brush. I've had some people do that and then it doesn't go into the paper and you get these little dots and it just really doesn't work as well as at first wetting the paper. Wet the paper with your brush first, and then if you want to keep it wet, that's where you use the mister. But don't wet your paper with the mister. Now a sprayer is a different story. This is a mister. It sends out a mist. See, it's like a mist, where a sprayer sends out a lot of water into your paper. So now it's evenly wet. It's evenly wet. And so what I want to do is keep away from this area right there. That's where the sun is going to be. And you always, with watercolor and even gouache, you start out when you're using it wet and wet like this, you start from light to dark. And so I'm going to take a little bit of yellow, add a little bit of white to it because I want to tone it down a little bit. And that happens with the paper too, but I kind of like to put a little bit of white in there. And I'm just going to go in here and just take it right across. Now look at how how potent that is. I took such a little bit amount of this. It's so concentrated. It's unbelievable how concentrated this paint is. It's like, and it's opaque. It's transparent now because I'm using it. I'm using it with a lot of water. It's very, very concentrated. I can't tell you how concentrated it is. It's just, you just have to use a little bit of it. If you're using it like gouache, where you're using it thick in water, you're just going to cover up way too much. Again, you can use it both ways, but I'm going to show you this way. If you never want to do this way again, that's fine. You can do that after, but for now, just give it a shot, give it a try. And so I'm going in there and I'm doing the sky, leaving my white right there, and just taking yellow. And when I went on orange, I wanted to go to orange. I just add a little bit of this red, and this red with this orange or with this yellow makes a nice orange. And I can make it a little bit thicker. Now it's all wet. So the more pigment I use with no water on my brush, then I can control it around. Now that got a little bit too dark. And so I'm gonna take a little bit more of the orange, the yellow, and a little bit of white. I'm gonna tone it down a little bit with white. I know you can do that with the paper too, but I want it to be transparent. And so I'm gonna put a little bit more water there, but see how I don't want it to run too far, just far enough. And as I'm going up, I'm staying away from my sun, and I'm taking the yellow and the white and the red to make a little bit of orange. And don't dip in really thick because it's just, like I said, it's very concentrated. But maybe you have to do that once. Just try it to see how concentrated it is. Making mistakes is a good thing because making mistakes shows you what you not to do the next time. And so then back here, sorry, there's a dog out front and he's barking at something. So you have the blue. Now I'm gonna take the blue, and to make a purple, I just add a little bit of the red. And so there's a little bit of purpley bluish, a little bluish purple. I'm just gonna put it on the top here. And it's a red and blue together. See how I make a purple instantly with purple, red, and blue? So know your color wheel, hopefully. Hopefully you know your color wheel and how to make your colors, because we're only using 3 primary colors. But with 3 primary colors, you can make all the colors to an extent. It's like quinacridone gold you can't make because it's a certain pigments that that's its own thing. So that's the I want my blue light, but I'm putting on purple, and I can't use the white of the paper. Then just use the white of the gouache white, and then make up your blue first with white, and then go in there afterwards. And you're using it very transparently, so you're just making your color first before you put it down. If I used it thick like this by itself, that's going to be too dark. Watch, see, that's too dark. And it's actually too vibrant too for me. So I like to put a little bit of white into that blue and kind of making my blue color first before I put it on here. And if I want to make it more violet, I put a little bit of red in there. And I make a lavender. And so look at this nice lavender you make. Which Holbein, their watercolors, everybody loves the Holbein lavender color. And if it's starting to dry on you, that's where you take a mister and you just spray it a little bit more, just very lightly. You put the mister and take that down. And like I said, if you want to use white to get a little light blue here, just go ahead and mix white to it. I know many watercolorists are against using white because it's not a traditional way of doing watercolor, but we're not doing watercolor. Yes, we are doing watercolor, but we're adding gouache, so that's not even traditional either. Either you use it like gouache or you use like watercolor, but we're doing both. And I'm really loving that kind of look. I actually enjoy that look now. So it's not traditional, but it's, a different way of thinking and doing things. Now up here, I'm gonna make it a little bit darker orange. And you notice how it's all soft edged? It's all soft edged and it's all transparent. And we're using gouache. Watercolor. See, so you can actually use it both ways. That's really cool for me. I think you're getting best of both worlds. And since the sun is right here, right from the sun, you would start from yellow to orange to red, go away from there. And so up here, I'm gonna add a little bit of orange in this area, right, real close to this. We're gonna add a little bit of more orange. And so I gotta mix my orange because we only have these 3 colors. If they make the orange colors and stuff, you can buy them, but for this sample, sometimes it's good for students actually to start out with just 5 colors like this, because it makes you realize what the colors you can do to mix and how you can mix them. And what they come from, the complementary colors and making secondary colors. So it's kind of a way of learning too, by using 3 colors.
David, we have a question asking, so this is not the acrylic gouache, but can you talk about the difference between the acrylic gouache and the traditional artist gouache?
Yeah, the traditional artist gouache is watercolor, and it acts like watercolor, and you can it's releasable. Like later on when it dries, I can get back in there and I can wipe stuff out. I can put stuff back in, and with the acrylic gouache, it's more like an acrylic, and it dries hard, and it will not movable. You can't rub it out afterwards. And that's pretty much the only thing that's different about it. You know, so it's one's acrylic and one's watercolor. And basically that's it. I mean, it's like, though you can use them all together. That's another thing you have to realize is that you can use watercolor gouache with acrylic gouache, because maybe you want to do a sky like this and not have it be affected by the next wash on top of it, or by making it thick on top of it, or you want to protect it with the acrylic gouache. So that's all possible. I hope that answers that. It is just basically one's acrylic and one's watercolor, and they're both opaque. They're both matte and they're very opaque. Okay,
That's
so
great.
the
Thank
sky,
you.
I'm gonna keep it. No problem. So I just did a drop right here. I just did a droplet there, and so put this over here now. Okay, set it down. Now let's go right into that part, and we're going right into our water. So that's a big area. So I'm just going to take and just start doing my water, and it's going to be a reverse of what I just did. And I'm going to make it a little bit darker though. I'm going to make it a little bit darker. I'm going to start out with maybe an orange. And I'm not going to worry about the sun reflecting in there, because you know, most watercolors would do that, keeping the white of the paper, but I'm not going to do that because that stops me from doing a big, nice wash across this whole thing. And you notice I go right into this land over here, because that's going to be darker later. So I can go right over the top of that with a thick opaque wash. And so here I'm going to just go back and forth, and maybe even put a little bit of blue in there. Nah, that doesn't look so good. Let's get a little bit of orange in there. And it's going across, and I'm going to keep the horizon line soft edged. I don't have to make it hard. If yours dried by now and it got too dry and you're making a hard edge, that's fine too. I'm waiting to put the island in there because I want it to be dry when I put that in there. Same thing with the palm trees. Again, this is more of a watercolor kind of technique than it is a gouache technique. But why not? To me, it's faster and easier to let the watercolor blend, or have the gouache blend itself, than having to blend the gouache thick. You know, though some people do like that. They like that look of blending the gouache thick, very thick. This is very thin and used as a transparent way. It's up to you. I mean, it's always up to the artist what you want to do, and what makes you different maybe from the next artist. You know, it's all about what you want to do. And so I don't leave too much white there. Like, I'm not looking to leave white of the paper. I'm going to get the paper covered, and then I can go back in with gouache and make it opaque on top of that. And I actually, like I said, I like that look. I think that look is pretty neat. Now down here by the sand, I will wet it all again, because now it's dried by now. It's dry. And so I'm just going to re-wet it. And I just happen to have yellow in my brush, but it doesn't matter what I have in my brush, because I'm just wetting it. By putting a color in your brush, you can see where you've gone. And so then it's all really wet. And now I'm going to do the beach, and I'm going to make it kind of orange, but then put a little blue in it to dull down the orange. So when you mix complements like a blue and an orange, that's where you get more of a gray or a brown. Grays and browns are made with complements. So I just mixed in the orange, but then I put a little blue in there, and it turns it kind of brownish. So we got to go in here now and just get the dark. And so we're just going to come in. And so what you're going to do is you're going to take and just do the soft edges again. You're not doing hard edges yet. You're not doing it like a gouache painting that you do like as an oil. You're doing it as a watercolor, kind of a watercolor technique. I find it to be easier because I'm a lazy artist. I like to blend. I like things to blend themselves. And with watercolor, and even when I use oils, I use aqua oils. that duos that Holbein has, I still use it like a watercolor first because I don't like blending. I don't like to have to blend. I let the water blend for me. And so we're gonna just put this in here and I'm gonna get some grays in here also. And don't worry about like texture right now. We're looking for the soft edges. That's why we're doing it wet into wet.
David, I don't know if you want to expand on this. I tried to answer it myself. Bridget is asking about the difference with gouache and some that gouache is labeled as casein. I know that traditional gouache uses a gum arabic binder and casein uses a milk-based binder, but can you elaborate any on that?
It's basically all it is, really. I mean, it's just the binders that they use and what they put into the mix because it's kind of pretty close to the same thing. It's opaque. So just think of it as like what color you want to use that's opaque. And even watercolors, there are opaque colors in there. And if you take some transparent watercolors, a few of them some of them have white in them, making it kind of opaque. And so some of the companies use whitening agents to make their gouache. Some people, and like Holbein doesn't use whitening agents, which is why I really like them a lot because they don't look pastel like, and some of the caseins kind of look really kind of pastelly. Is that a word? But it makes it look a little too pastel for me. And so I like the fact that the bright colors that they have, I mean, if you look at some of their colors they have in gouache, it's just phenomenal of the brightness of them, especially the acrylic gouache. Some of the acrylic gouache is like almost like fluorescent. And so now, I mean, the whole front is all soft, right? So this is basically the whole soft part of it. Wet into wet, and this is the watercolor. And now we're gonna go into this part and we're gonna get I still have to wait for this to dry, which is I always go from light to dark when I'm using a watercolor. If I'm using gouache like oils, then I would start with the darks because I'm putting it on very thick. But because I'm using it as a watercolor medium, the gouache, I have to do the lights first and I put the darks over top of them. And so that's just ways oil painters work with dark to light and watercolors work light to dark. And so all just depends on how you're putting the paint down and how thick you're putting it down. And so now what I do, this is still wet. And so I can't if I want a hard edge, I cannot put it down yet. And so I'm just gonna wait for that to dry a little bit. And while that's drying, I'm gonna go over here because I don't mind if this is a little bit softer edge. And I'm gonna use it pretty thick. The darks over here, I'm gonna start putting it on really thick. And so the mix of brown, I first need to make an orange. So I make an orange with the yellow and red again. And then I put a little blue in there. And that'll give me kind of a brownish look and a dark look. And also, if you want to darken a color, go ahead and use black. Traditionally, watercolors they mix their blacks. And I'm a teacher that teaches you to start out with black and put color into it. So take your black, put it down here. And then if you want color, put color into the black. Like here, you can take a red and black, and that kind of makes it kind of a brownish color too. Or take black and the orange, and that makes kind of a brown. And look at how thick I'm putting it on now. I'm actually putting it on like a gouache now. It's not like a watercolor. It's basically like gouache, and I'm putting it on thick. Now, when it hits the water, it's going to bleed like a watercolor because it's going to blend, like I was talking about before. And don't worry if you don't have it washy, I guess you could say. You can put the light color on top of that when it's dry. So you can add it like an oil. See, it's really the best of both worlds. I mean, and I think that's why it has become kind of popular. Gouache has become very popular with a lot of artists, and a lot of oil painters like to use the acrylic gouache. And a lot of watercolors like using the watercolor gouache, the traditional gouache. And it's just become very popular because I think because of that reason, because you can use it both ways. You can use it like a watercolor, you can use it like an oil and acrylic. I used to teach acrylic classes, but now I don't do that anymore because I just say, hey, just use gouache, same type of thing, or use acrylic gouache. So I guess it really is a acrylic class if you're using acrylic gouache. So there's the dark. And look at how I mix up, look how many colors I have within this five color set. So if you're strapped for cash and you need to get going and you're painting, hey, just get 5 colors. These are the 5 colors we actually really need. And so we're going to be taking black, blue, and I'm just going to try to make it again a little bit of brown. I'm going to do the pine or the trees now, the little. And again, this should probably be dry now, and which it is. Mine is dry, and I'm not worried about floating the pigment. My big thing when I'm as a teacher, excuse me, I ask everybody to float their pigment when you're watercolors, like you're taking water, putting it down and floating the pigment in there. In this instance, I'm just making it thick. I'm just going in there thick with a big amount of pigment and just getting it and getting it done. Though that doesn't mean I don't put other colors in there. I may take a yellow and put it into the trunk too, to show the light coming from one side. It's just more of a different technique. How's everybody doing? Is it okay? Are you falling way far behind? What's going on out there, guys?
So far, the chat is empty. I think everyone's working away right now.
All right, good.
Fun.
And like watercolor, if you use it wet into wet, it will lighten. But if you're using it like gouache, it will not lighten because you're using it so thick. It's just whatever you pick up will put down. So if you're a watercolorist and you always realize that when you're doing a wet into wet wash, it lightens 20%. Well, when it's gouache and used thick, it will not lighten. But if you're using it like watercolor, yes, it will lighten too. I know somebody's going to ask that anyway, so I figure I might as well say that right now. So let's go on to the other tree trunk here. And now this tree trunk we're going to do a little bit differently because the sun is right there. So we're going to start out with a really bright color because the sun, I call this optical scatter. I learned this from another artist that I took a workshop from, Carl Bretsky. And it's optical scatter that happens right here because it's going to be like almost yellow orange, right where it's burning through these branches. And so I'm just going to do the branches orange and yellow because it makes it look like the sun is just burning through there. Keep it white behind there. And as it goes away from it, you can get darker and darker. And to make a green, of course, you need blue and yellow. And actually, I'm not going to make them really, really bright green because the sun is so red and it's making everything. I don't know if you're out there in the sunset, even though things are green, it doesn't mean it's bright green. It's usually covered up by all the red that's happening in the sky. So I'm going to keep it limited to like a reddish green. I put orange into my green. If that's a thing, I think it's a thing, reddish green. And so then we're going to put the trunk, and the trunk starts out a little bit more warm and it'll get darker as it goes on here. And you can even use like pure red or pure orange. And if you want, you can mix yourself a little bit of orange and put it over here. Like just mix an area where it's a little bit more orange so you don't have to mix it every time. And a lot of people do that too. They mix their colors so that you have a little pile of like orange. And if you're only using 3 colors, you want to make orange or green, you can do that on the side. So I'm taking a little bit of orange. I'll make a little bit of orange over here so I can dip into orange when I need it. So I'll start right here, make this orange and lighter. And as it goes back, and I'm using it pretty thick. I'm using it again more like I would a gouache, like an acrylic or an oil, where I'm putting it on pretty thick. And that also gives me dimension in the picture. That's dimension that looks like actual thickness to it. So then as it goes down here, I'm just going to make it really dark and see how it goes from light to dark. And now while this is this is dry now, and so I'm just going to put that in there real quickly. And that's just going to be very warm right here because it's next to the sun. The sun, remember, is right there. So we're going to start that with like a yellow. Right over here, we're going to start that with a yellow. And I'm not doing this one too thick. If you do it thick, that's fine too. But I don't need to. I can make it look more transparent. I can just go in here and make it a little bit darker when it goes away from the sun. If you did it thick, you still got to make it the value. You don't make, just because you're making something thick doesn't mean it has to be darker. It just means that you need to make it the same value, but it's just gonna be thicker. And you're gonna get a hard edge and it'll have actually dimension in it, but I made that a little bit not so thick. Either way is fine. Either way is fine. And a little white to this. And then maybe this part will get a little bit thicker. And I noticed my water got really light because it was transparent. So I'm gonna go back into this water and make it a little bit dark, but I'm gonna wet it. I'll wet it a little bit. If you didn't make it dark enough, you can also do that too. You can just go in here, re-wet it, and actually this is maybe there'll be a shadow of the water. And actually that's too bright or too dark. So I'm just gonna go in there. A little bit bluer right here. And leave this a little bit lighter up here. That's okay. Leave that a little bit lighter. So I just re-wet something. And the great thing is if this doesn't work out, I can keep on going over and over because I can go with opaque colors. I can just cover up over that too. And they'll look a little bit more like a oil painted type of look or the acrylic kind of look. All right, so that's what we now have is we have our big parts and we're getting darker and darker. Now we're gonna go into these trees. I'm gonna go here, get these done. Over here, this is a little bit more tricky because let's start with there. Let's go with our lights to dark because that'll make you realize that you have to go light here first. I'm putting yellow fronds in here to orange, right? Pre-mixed orange here. And as I go away from the sun, when there's more the thickness to the branches, then it get darker. See, like right here, it's darker, but when it gets right by the sun there, you can make it really yellow and orange and red. Really make it look like the sun is hitting this side. Anything away from the sun, pointing away from the sun, that will be the dark parts. Like this side of the tree here is away from the sun and towards us. So that's where you can make it dark. And again, it doesn't have to be bright green. It could be just a orange with a little bit of blue and yellow, makes it kind of green. But because the sun is so red, it kind of makes the branches a little bit red. And this brush, you can just flick the brush to get the little fronds in there. So I'm just flicking it. Into this. And I'm gonna use a little bit more red up there, a little bit more orange, actually a little bit more green. The farther away it gets from the sun, the more you're gonna see green. And that's just blue and orange, blue and yellow. So that's a little bit of yellow. And see how I'm mixing it on my palette. Now, if I was using acrylic gouache, this would dry and then you can't go mix it up. Where the designer gouache, you can keep on using this because it's not gonna dry hard. Not like plastic, because it isn't plastic. It's watercolor based water. All right, and then I'm gonna add an extra branch here. Just use the very tip and just flick your wrist for the very tip and then see how I'm just getting, I don't want to make them perfect. You know, don't go in there and try to make them perfect because these is blowing in the wind and you can just do them a little bit differently, each one too. I just flick here, maybe this one got in that kind of style. Now this one's bending this direction. And even if you make this all just dark and, you know, that's fine too. Really, there's silhouetted shapes basically. And now I'm getting closer there. I should be getting more orange yellow. So I'm rinse my brush. And you know, I'm not sure if you noticed, but I'm working on a towel. If I've been doing that and I do these paint alongs, I'm on YouTube. My name is David R. Becker. I'm on YouTube with Becker Art. And I do a free lesson every Thursday night from 6:30 Central Standard Time on YouTube Live. And I put out a newsletter every Tuesday showing what we're going to be painting. So we paint something every week. And you can sign up for that on my website, which is my name, davidrbecker.com or beckerart.net. And then you can follow along for free. It doesn't cost anything. And then if you go to my website, you can see what we're painting like next week. And also on Sunday mornings, a lot of times I'll do plein air or I'll be out in my studio and I call it painting or in the studio with David basically, because you're just watching me paint. And a lot of times I just want to show you how I'm doing things or I'm trying something new. And I just put on the camera and let you see what I'm trying. And that's all on YouTube. And so here now I'm just, again, the farther away it is, the more I'm going to make it darker, these fronds. And then as it goes over here, I'm going to keep it closer, make it red and yellow. It's actually, I'm so happy sometimes to do this, just take 5 colors, because it really makes you think. And when you have all those colors in my palette, sometimes I think, which color should I use, which color should I use? And this makes it so easy. Because these are only colors that can mix. And so now I'm gonna make this really light area here. So it looks like it's really burning through this area here. So some of these fronds are yellow, basically bright yellow, because they're being burnt out by the sun. You really don't see them because it's just being burnt out. All right, so that's that one. And now let's go to this one. And now this one can be pretty close all the same because the sun is way over here. So it's not burning out anything over here. So this can be dark. You can't put the redder leaves in the more yellow green over here because that's what pointing towards the sun. And this is like, doesn't matter if it's the kind of this palm tree, a regular tree, or anything that's in front of the sun. It's still the same thing. You do the same thing. This just happens to be a palm tree. If there was let's say a lighthouse right there by the sun, they're the same thing. It would be yellow and really bright right there. And so here we're going to put the little. And also, anytime you're painting something, paint stuff that you know and love. That's what I tell all my students, paint stuff that you know and love, because then you'll know what a palm tree looks like. Or if you love beach scenes like this, I'm sure you've been out there, take tons of pictures, sketch them. That way you know how to, and love it, and you're gonna love doing the painting too. Now I'm gonna make this a little bit darker away from there, make it maybe a little bit more green. Here's a little bit darker green. And look at how with this one brush, they have such a fine point. These points are so fine on this brush. It's like one little hair there, and you just really lightly touch. Give it a real light touch. And then if I want it darker, just add black to that green. Just add black. And now this brown's gonna be a little bit more orange. Again, don't make any of these the same. A lot of times I see like a pinwheel and you're separating each one perfectly. So you don't want to do that. They're not so symmetrical. And you don't want them to be, instead of 5 or 6 branches, put in 5, because odd numbers are always better. Always put in odd number shapes and sizes. And all right, so there's the second one. Now we go into this mess over here, and that's just dark. And if you bend this brush, let me just show you on another sheet of paper. But if you're doing some other kind of trees, this brush, and I'm not sure if other brushes do this, but they're cut, some of the bristles are cut shorter. So if you bend it backwards like this, you can use it and to make like little pine needle looking type of things. See, I'm just bending it forward. So basically you're taking it, pushing the point. So you're not using the point to make the things, you're using the side of the bristles. And so I'm guessing you're pushing it outwards like this. So if you can see that again. So I'm taking the brush, I'm pushing it down, but then I'm pushing and using the back bristles. And see how it just pushes the back bristles? And some of that looks like fronds, right? Some of these palms, or if you're doing like a, yeah, all kinds of different things that look like that. So that's just one thing I learned one time when I was playing around with my brush. And that's one thing you should also do. None of these art supplies come with instructions, right? You buy all these things from Plaza Art, and you're like, you go home and you're like, oh, I'm going to use this now, but there's no instructions really. So you got to make it up, right? And the thing to do is then practice with it. Don't start doing a painting with it. Just take a sheet of paper and practice. What can you do with this brush? Here, look at it, I'm pushing it into there. I'm getting this nice little, without having to do each one of these little fronds, I'm just pushing the brush and they're making it for me. Boom, 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 you're done. See how fast it is? And then in here, I'm gonna put some really dark darks and stuff. Here, I'm just put black on top of that, what I just did. And I'll put some green in here. See, it wouldn't be bright green again, because why wouldn't it be bright green? Because the sun is so red and so warm that it'd be more orange and red. Like this one is not as red as I had done earlier. But each time you do this, and I'm sure yours guys are also gonna be a little bit different. It's all, it's all what you had done. And just live with it. Basically, don't feel like you have to correct things. It's hard to correct something like this, though you can correct it, you can just go over it. But most established artists put something down and leave it. They don't go back in over and over and over. And that's, I know it's a learning process. Sometimes you have to, but try to do the things that you're doing in one shot. Try to get in there and get out. Like everything I did, see, it was one shot. I didn't go back in. I'm not going to go back in. Just get it done. So now we have the outside here. And again, I'm not worried about seeing through there, and I'm not worrying about it being transparent, because I can put lights on top of that to show like things going through there, or reflections of something, or a little bit of warmth in the side of it. That's where the gouache comes in. So now we're about halfway through this, right? It's 1 o'clock, is it? So we're halfway through, and I'm just gonna let things dry. I'm gonna make sure, and I'll maybe let you guys catch up. And I'm just gonna show you a couple of things that I have done with this, with gouache and watercolor together. And so, I'm trying to get all my students who are watercolorists to maybe use a little bit of gouache, but also if you're a watercolorist or a gouache artist that uses traditional gouache, instead of framing it with mats and glass, I'm trying to get everybody to use either a varnish their watercolors in gouache, or take and wax it, cold wax. And so you can cold wax it that way. And you also would need to mount this on a panel. This is just a sheet of paper, but you need to mount it to a panel, right? And so this right here is a panel. And Legion makes a panel called aluminum panel. They take the paper that you're working on and they place it and they glue it to a aluminum panel. This was done as a gouache watercolor, and this was actually done on canvas. This was actually done on canvas, where I used a absorbent ground, which a lot of companies sell an absorbent ground. It's like a gesso that it absorbs the pigment, and then you can just do your watercolor gouache on top of the canvas. And so that's one of the things you can do. Now I would wax this or varnish it, and I would put it into a frame, and then without a glass, and then to makes it also more valuable. So that's one of the things I've done, and I'm trying to get my students to do. So it doesn't matter if you're using gouache or watercolor, it's a water-based medium, and you want it to be protected, so you can use either the varnish or the cold wax. Then they also have their black paper. I'll put it on the side here so you guys can see. This is the black paper, and this is mostly watercolor and gouache. The white is this is actually more watercolor than gouache. But like I said before, there are some watercolors that Holbein has that makes it white, right? And so it's Chinese white is transparent, titanium white is opaque, and it's kind of like a gouache. So this is their black paper, their black watercolor paper, which they also have mounted now onto aluminum panels. And then we have this is just their 300-pound art. And what I also do a lot now with gouache is I use stencils. I can either take out the paint because it's not acrylic, or I can put acrylic into it. And so this is just a stencil on this, and I can either take out the paint, like I can rub it with a magic eraser, or I can put in with gouache, and I can just, like you do on your wall when you're doing stencil your wall. You take a stencil brush and you just kind of put it in there. Or you can take an airbrush. If you got an airbrush, you can put that into the stencil. There's also another one on the panel. I'm sorry.
Ellen has a question here. She says, why do you say that varnish or cold wax makes a painting more valuable? Is that the question?
Perception. Galleries don't like It's a perception of the painting being more valuable. Galleries don't like to take things with glass on them because you can't sell them for as much as an oil or acrylic that doesn't have glass behind them. And I think we did that to ourselves, us watercolors. We started making so many prints. And so the prints are just as good looking as the photo, the original, that a customer comes to the gallery and they see a print and it's only $50. And when maybe the original is $300, and the average person who doesn't really know about much about art, they're going to go for the cheaper one, right? And so we have all these artists selling prints and they look just like the originals. I mean, the prints nowadays are so good. They're even done on watercolor paper and they're just really beautiful. And so once you take that glass away from it, it looks a little bit more, the perception is that it's more valuable. And you can ask any gallery, they would rather take one without glass than one with it. And on a gallery, basically that's real estate on their wall. And so they want to get the most money for your paintings. And I literally have started not putting glass and mat board on mine. And I've actually sold for like 75% more money, or like 50% more I'm getting for them. And so, and the thing is, you have to get some nice frames, nice wider frames, like plein air frames, because they have to look like an oil, right? You can't frame them like a watercolor because you don't have a mat. If you don't have a mat and you just have a real thin frame around it, that's not that great looking, unless it's big and modern, and then it's fine. But nowadays, you don't want to put a little frame on this nice, beautiful watercolor, and then it looks better when you put it behind a really beautiful frame. So yeah, it's perception. I've taken a couple of classes on marketing and stuff of the watercolors, and that's what they say. That's what I've learned from them too, is that it's a perception of the buyer, and even the gallery owners, they don't like glass in front of something. Now pastels, of course, you have to put it on there, but then you can put the glass that you can't see, the really the museum quality glass. But that's really expensive, and average person, artist, can't afford that. All
Thank you.
right.
And then I just wanted to mention to everyone, the Legion panels that you had previously mentioned, the aluminum back ones. These are things that we are going to actually be carrying in Plaza and online later this year in the fall. They are really great. All the papers are mounted to an aluminum board, so they're beautiful.
And this is I'm gonna later on, I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna wax this to show you how to wax it. And that way I can just mount it onto a panel and then just put it right into a frame. And also us watercolors have to start working standard size. And if you're working standard size, then you can save a lot on framing. And this is 8x10, right? And so there's a bunch of frames that are 8x10. And so when you cut a sheet of paper or watercolor paper that's 22x30, you cut it in quarters, you get 11x15, and there are no custom sized frames. So cut an inch off of there, so make it 11x14, and then mount it to a board, and then wax it or varnish it. And then it's just things that, like, why would you do that? If you're getting more money for it, it's easier. The thing is, us watercolors, and I was doing the same thing. I was always just custom framing everything. And but now I'm just trying to get everybody to say, hey, it's a no-brainer to do this way and get it to standard size. And then boy, it's so easy to frame now too. And also, if you're a plein air painter, like I've become a kind of a plein air painter, when there's the competitions, you can just frame it instantly. It's just go in there, put your little you take your pinner, your point driver, and just put the points into the frame, and you're done. And that's so wonderful. And I actually love the aluminum panels because they're really durable and really amazing. They don't bend, they don't, So, okay, I think mine's dry now. And did everybody catch up? Did everybody catch up? Any questions about anything so far?
It looks Nan has a question. So you mount to the panel after you finish the painting.
Normally you don't want to do that. Normally you want to mount the paper first and then do the painting on that. That's the easiest way because it's a little bit harder. Then you have to be really careful. And then if you are going to mount it before you wax it, you're gonna maybe wreck the front. So I would suggest if you didn't mount it first, then first wax it, first varnish it, then put it onto a panel so that if you get something on the front, it's protected. The reason you're protecting it is because you just don't want it to damage it, and you don't want to put water on it if it's traditional watercolors, because a little bit of water is gonna mess it all up. So by putting the varnish on it or the wax, it just protects it.
Sean
And then
also is
take it.
asking, oh, I'm sorry. No, please go
Go
on.
ahead, go ahead.
Oh, Sean's asking about if you have any suggestions for avoiding blooms.
Blooms, as in when you're working wet into wet. That
Yes.
would be, so the reason you're getting blooms is because you're letting your paper dry and then you're putting more water on it. So you got to keep your paper, wet evenly. And so if all of a sudden it starts drying and you lose the sheen, then you're going to put a little bit more water in there. So always watch how much shine you have on your paper, because it's all about in a wet wash. If it starts drying and then you put more water on and it's on there, that's where you get your blooms. So just always watch the wash, that it's always evenly wet. And if your pigment is not floating, that's the watercolor style though. That's just in the watercolor style when you're doing wet into wet. If you're doing gouache and just putting it on and blending it, now you don't have to worry about that. But they would also bloom because anytime you put more water on the paper than is already on there, like when it's drying, even with gouache, it's going to give it a little bit of a bloom, right? You're going to get a watermark. So yeah, just watch your wetness of your paper. You got to keep it wet evenly. And that just comes with practice too. A lot of practice will get you there. Now with this,
Great, thank you.
I'm going to do the water, and I'm going to do the beach here, the beachfront, and I'm just going to look at under each wave. It's going to be a little bit darker under each wave, and just use the color that is already there. And you can also mix in a little bit of this blue up here, because water is reflecting what's above it, basically. This is clear water. I'm sure this is clear water, so it's not the color of the water, it's the color of what's around it. That's what you're seeing. And the white is only because it's churned up. The white in there will be later on. I'm going to put the white in there. That means it's churned up. And so you get white. But this is just the color of what's above it. And so I'm just going to take a little bit of the orange, which is up here, but also some of the blue. And I'm still using it a little bit thin. I'm not making it thick yet. I get thicker and thicker as I go along, because again, I want to have like a little bit of it to be more transparent, because I'm a transparent artist. And so I'm so used to doing it that way first. And then I just get thicker and thicker as I go along. And so this is actually opaque here a little bit, so it's covering up my yellow underneath it, but making it a little bit darker, and that's absolutely fine. Here, I'm gonna put a little bit I'm taking like the little white and blue I have here that was still in my palette from before. I'm just gonna use a little bit of that. I'm gonna put this in here. I'm just gonna go down here, go underneath the wave, go underneath where the wave comes over. There's a hard edge line right there. And on top of that will be white later, because it's rolling over. It's the wave rolling over. And then I'm going to use the color of the sand down here, because this is going to be right where sand starts, and make that a little bit darker. And I could not do down here where there's going to be a reflection, but I'm going to take care of that with my gouache. I'm not going to worry about that right now. And that's the greatest thing about gouache, is that you don't have to worry about things. Don't worry so much. Watercolors are always worried because you want it fresh, and then if you didn't get it, you didn't get it, basically. Well, here we can always go back and get whatever we want to get. Here now, over here, this is all dry now. I'm gonna take my brush across it quickly, like a dry brush, and get a little texture in the sand. So I'm just it's not a wet brush, it's kind of filled with paint. It's not huge, thick amount of paint, but it's just like, I'm gonna scumble a little bit, scumbling across the surface. It's a little bit textured. And so I'm taking it a little bit drier. My brush is not wet. And see, I'm just kind of going over it and just getting some of the texture. I'm gonna leave alone that part right in the middle here, because that's the reflection of the sand. And I will also I'm probably gonna put a little bit of footprints in the sand, and that'll be later for detail. So that'll be a little bit later on with detail. And so over here, that didn't get dark enough. So I'm just gonna take a little bit darker color. I'm just gonna do it thick and I don't have to worry about it blending or bleeding. I'm just gonna put it on thick, hard edge. That's okay. It gives a little texture too. Like I said, I'm gonna get thicker and thicker as I go along and I'm gonna get some hard edges in there because I had all my big areas done and now I'm just going in there and getting detail. A little bit more detail, harder edges, more identification of what the objects are actually are. Like here, these are rocks and maybe you just go around some of them. Like there's a hard edge, maybe there's some rocks sitting there in the sand. And as it goes away, this is the sun ray that's going to be right down the middle here. So what I'm going to do is take it and go, and again, a little bit darker on this, right underneath the wave. Right underneath the wave is a little bit darker. And you can do that with blue, orange, really whatever. It doesn't, you don't have to be exact in exact colors. More about the values, always is more about the values. Get your values right. Colors are important, yes, they are important, but I would say the values are just as important. What's that old saying? The values do all the work and the colors take all the credit. I think that's the saying that I keep on hearing. So I'm gonna make this sand a little bit darker and I'm gonna do it more with a wash. I'm gonna do more with a wash here. And I'm just taking like a tint of color. I'm just gonna put a little wash here to make the sand a little bit darker. Right there, I think I need it just slightly darker. I'm kind of getting this sand lighter right here again because that's where the sun's going to hit the sand. And that makes it look like the sand is wet then too. So if you really like this kind of thing where you're working with me, but most of the people that follow me on YouTube and I do it every Thursday night do not paint at the same time. Like I know some of you are going to watch this later and do it later, and that's usually an easier way of doing it instead of trying to hurry up and follow along. Just watch it and pick it all up, and then you can stop it when you need to stop it. Like do that wash, stop it, keep on going, which I think you can do for this too later on if you can just stop it and figure it out and come back to it. Here, put little darks in the water to like seeing through the water a little bit. And again, it's don't worry too much about if it looks like something yet, because we are allowed to now use the gouache to make things look even better. If you forgot something or you felt like you didn't get the right value or stuff, well, don't worry about it. You can just go back in with a heavy amount of opaque gouache and get it done. It's no big deal. Like this area right here, I can use thick now. And I'm gonna take a little bit of orange and white and so here's my orange. I ran out of the orange. Let's take a little bit more orange here. Take a little bit of white to lighten up my orange here a little bit. And I'm gonna put like on these rocks and whatever this foliage is, I'm gonna put a little light on the edges to make it look like the sun is hitting the edge of this part right here. And you can also do that on the side of the tree. You can put a little bit of that. And it's also good for details. I mean, now it's detail time because I've got all the big areas done. And so I'm going in for details now. And I still haven't done the white in there yet because I haven't gotten to that point yet. But now is the time I'm using it like an oil painter. I'm using it thick. And I put a little water down, but I'm using it pretty thick and opaque wise. It's not transparent at all now. I'm using it like an opaque wash. Like traditionally, we use of gouache. So I'm just kind of picking up little lights and darks here and I feel like now is when something doesn't look right, that's where you come in and you start fixing it with a thick amount of paint. So now I'm putting detail in the trunk of the tree too. And this, if you were doing this and maybe there were people on the beach and stuff, you can still do that. I didn't want to put anything more to make it difficult for you. But then I also notice now that my island back there is not quite dark enough because it's kind of looking like the same value as the water. And so I'm gonna make it a little bit darker. I'm gonna take a tint of color, go back in here, and then just again, you can fix it up anytime you want. You can see I'm making it a little bit darker. It is kind of transparent. I'm still using it kind of transparently. You can make it thick or thin. That doesn't really matter. No right or wrong way about that. It's whatever you want to do. Mhm. I feel it's a little bit too warm though. I'm gonna put a little coolness into it. So I'm gonna take a little bit blue, take a little bit of white and blue, make it a light blue, and then tone that into the red that I had here. I'm just gonna make it a little bit cooler, a little bit grayer. Just felt like it just seems a little bit too red back there. And like if you're doing this with watercolor and you want to keep it transparent, you would have to actually wipe that out so that it doesn't look really overworked. Here, it doesn't matter. Just go right over the top of it. It's opaque, it'll fill up really nicely. It must be hard at work because it seems very quiet. I'm not used to quiet. Please ask some more questions. Whatever you need to know about gouache, acrylic, not acrylic, but gouache, watercolor.
Actually, I have a question. When you're talking about putting on the paint in a thick layer, you're not talking about like a textured layer because that would crack, correct? You're talking about this, like an even coat. Is that
You
my
can put on
understanding?
you can put on thick, but you can't put on super thick where it's like oils where you're putting it on like a quarter of an inch thick, not that thick, but thick so it's opaque. So you're not putting it on like transparently. Basically, what I'm saying is that you can put it on and cover up an area, and it's not again, it's not like we can almost feel it, but you can almost do a little bit of that. It's not, but I don't think you can get like a quarter inch thick like you do with like acrylics or oil. So you can do that with the acrylic gouache, but not with the watercolor gouache, because that would crack off, probably crack off a little bit when you get to a certain thickness.
And you said you've done this painting from your head. Have you taken vacations in spots like this?
No. Oh, yes and no. But once you're an illustrator with storyboards, my job was to just whatever the art director would tell me to paint and draw or draw for the commercial, TV commercial, I would have to do that out of my head. So I've seen palm trees and I've painted enough of them to know what they kind of look like. And then, I have like a photographic memory now because 35 years I worked for doing storyboard for TV commercials, and I've gone and made every kind of commercial you can possibly think of. And so I worked with Miller Coors, I worked with Taco Bell, Wendy's. And so, think of the commercials at Wendy's or Taco Bell or Coors Miller, and and there's something in there that would have to draw, and I couldn't go and just have that person set up, or I couldn't go and look at a pine tree or a palm tree. I'd have to just look on the internet now. It was nice when I first started, they didn't have the internet, but now you go Google it and here's a picture. And then you just use that picture, but I can turn it around any way I want now because I see it three-dimensionally. And so this book I might be putting out is going to be a way, and actually maybe even a thing like this where we're going to work on it every day for 66 days. We're going to be teaching you how to use your imagination and work from your mind's eye. It's like an actor memorizes lines. You need to memorize the shape of things. So let's say you're drawing a giraffe. Let's say everybody knows what a giraffe looks like, right? Could you draw one if you thought, yeah, I mean, you've seen a giraffe, right? So can you draw it from your imagination? And so you just start thinking of the big picture. You don't look at every part of the giraffe, like all the pattern on his skin or on his hide. You don't look at that. You look at the overall shape of a giraffe. And the length of the neck is pretty long, right? And so those things. And so you just look for the big parts. And that's how you learn how to draw from your imagination, because you have to just look for the big picture and take snapshots in your head. And so that's what my book is going to be. It's going to give you things to do for that day, and you get to look at it, but you can't ever draw the picture from the actual scene. You have to look at, memorize it, and then you look away. You do not look at the picture when you're drawing. I took 4 years of life drawing at the American Academy of Art, and every day for 4 years I drew a model. I got done with this 4 years of life drawing, and I couldn't draw. I was a great copy machine. As long as that model was up there, I could draw it. But when that model went off the stand or moved a little bit, then I'd be like, oh my God, no, I can't draw it now. Well, you got to be able to draw. So you do it from your imagination. You look at it and study it like an actor studies his lines. You study the form. You study the form and figure it out. And then it resides in your head, where when you're doing it for 4 years, just looking at the object and drawing at the same time you're looking at it, then nothing sticks up there. You're not thinking about it, and you're just drawing it because it's there. So you're memorizing the shape, and you're kind of memorizing the form. So that's my my contribution, hopefully one day get everybody to learn how to draw from their imagination.
No, that is fantastic. I know I've done an exercise where we did something to try to draw maps of like your state or the United States from memory. And,
Yep.
we all know it, but when it came to actually putting it on paper, the results were hilarious in our class.
Yeah, so it's really funny because you don't really realize it until you are an artist and have to draw it from your imagination, from your memory. It's like, you know what a giraffe looks like, you know what a horse looks like, you know what a dog looks like. But why can't you draw it? You just, because you don't know you don't know the big features, like the big parts. You just have to know the big parts and the little relation to each other. Now I can pretty much draw anything that you ask me to draw, because I practiced it for 35 years. And so as long as I've seen it, except for horses. Horses I have a hard time with because their legs are all over the place. Their legs just go all over. So that's a little bit of a problem with those guys. Okay, so we're half an hour left. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna do the strong lighting now. And I'm gonna take this very thick. I'm gonna squeeze out some more white because my white is almost gone. It's almost gone. And so I'm gonna take a little bit of white, fresh white, because I'm gonna use it pure white. I'm just gonna use some pure white on there. I'm just gonna dip into it slightly, because right underneath the sun, when it hits it's gonna hit this hill, this island, it's gonna hit this right at the water, the top of the water, it's gonna sparkle. And then the top of the water, maybe it won't be white, it'll maybe be a little bit yellow and white. But what I'm gonna do is just dip into that real light, and it's gonna be thick, it's gonna be opaque, and go straight down. It doesn't bend, light does not bend. It goes straight down, and it'll reflect straight down from where it's at. I'm just gonna put this in, I'm gonna make it thick too. And this is normally, as a watercolorist, you would rub out or put masking fluid there first, but no more need for masking fluid. You just put in the white paint. All this watercolors hate masking fluid because we can't get it off the paper, that burps the paper sometimes. And so, hey, the solution is just use gouache. Just use gouache. And now you can't submit to certain watercolor societies, and that's okay, then you won't. You just don't submit this painting to it. And when you submit like to TWSA, Transparent Watercolor Society, then make sure that you don't use white. But watercolor societies and art clubs, there's a lot of them that do. You can submit anything, anything with white or anything with black. And I'm gonna put little dots in here, because anytime water has ripples or waves, you're gonna get reflecting of dots. You're gonna get all these dots and stuff. And so dots are good. They're little sparkles in the water. I'm even going to put it onto the sand a little bit. I'm going to rub it in, though, a little bit into the sand, because I don't want it to be really thick. So I'm going to rub it with my glove. I'm just going to rub it into the paper, and that way I can blend it too. Look at, I'm blending into the paper. And this is more of a oil painting maneuver or acrylic, where you blend with your fingers, or you blend with a stamp, or just blending. Because there is a time when you can blend too. Like when you're doing it wet and wet, you don't need to blend, but there is time to blending. And see. And then the waves, I'm gonna do the top of the waves, but I'm gonna add a little white to my, a little yellow to my white. Because I don't want it pure white, the top of the wave. I want it like it's reflecting a little bit of the yellow too. So white and yellow. It'll tone down my yellow too, because yellow, the lemon yellow, oh my God, it's made too concentrated. It's just so vibrant. I'm taking a little bit of white with yellow, and I'm gonna hit the top of the wave, and because that's where it's kind of rolling over. And I'm putting it in a very tip of my brush, very tip of my brush. I'm taking it and just kind of blending it into the top of the wave. And front here. And it's not all the way across, it's just little dots here and there. And you can put it, like this on the beach too. You can actually, because the beach sometimes gets wet and it's sand, and sand is basically glass, and sometimes that kind of looks like it's really bright and shiny. Put a little white on here. Again, I'm going to go up here and make my lights burn out some of these images. Oh, I was gonna make a little bit of a lighter color right on the mountain here, on this top right here. I'm gonna put that on there just because it's hitting that side of the mountain, right? Or the hill. Just always think, where's the sunlight hitting? What's it hitting? The side of these trees, it'd be hitting the side, maybe the back, because it's in front. The sun is in front, even though it's on the side, it's still the sun is in front of this tree. So you're gonna get a little rim lighting on this. So you get a little rim lighting. I can put a little white on the edge of on the edge of even the trunk of the tree, or here I can put a little rim lighting. Because it's so bright, it burns out the area. And that's our light source. Basically, that's our light source, and that's where you want all the light to go to. And so let's make the tips of these a little bit lighter yellow. Some of these branches, or these fronds, I'll put some fronds in here and just have them kind of stick out a little bit. Maybe some green. I'll put a little bit of green in here. A little bit red in there. Boy, it's so concentrated. When you use it too thick like that, it is so concentrated. This actually, one day take two colors, take a gouache and take your watercolor, a transparent watercolor, and put them on a paper together. And because if you do that, and you, like if I wet this, and I put like this thick amount of paint on this, is the red. Look at how it just expands. It's just so concentrated. It's such fine pigment that, look at that. I mean, it's just you do that with watercolor, it'll do a little bit of that, but it will not expand like that, and it will not be that bright through the thing, because it's transparent. You're going to see the paper through that, but the gouache, it just covers up, and it just is so pigmented. It's so pigmented. It's unbelievable. Because I can keep on bringing it down, and that's good for a watercolor technique, but the gouache technique, there it's really nice to have it pigmented, because then it'll cover up anything underneath it. It just covers right over, and that's why it's called gouache, and it's opaque. All right, let's make our last little footprints in the sand, and then we're pretty close to done with the picture. And then I have a few things I want to show you: how to wax it, and how to wax it. And I said I'm going to put some footprints in there and put little dots going across the. Here's your footprints of the people that came across the nice beach front here. And I'm not wearing a glove because I'm afraid that it's going to get into my skin or anything like that. I'm wearing a glove only the fact that for my camera purposes. When I have a black glove here, it knows where to focus in. When everything's light, or it doesn't have something to focus on. And I've found to the 500 paintings I've done on YouTube that by wearing a black glove, my camera stays focused. A lot of times it comes in and out of focus, but it also helps when you're rubbing. So, but I'm sure somebody's wanted to ask that.
I have two questions for you here, David. Are your classes on Thursday evenings saved on YouTube? So you can watch the past live streams, right? On
Yep,
your
they're
YouTube
there. I
channel?
got about five, like I just said, I got about 500 on there right now. So, and it's also things like I've done like now. I've done things for like Toronto Water Society or some of the societies or demonstrations I've given, or actually products, some of your products. I've given a little bit of like all the colors that Holbein makes. I just put them out there. So there's all the things that, because every week in my newsletter, I do some kind of like anything. I talk about like maybe waxing your painting or putting your gluing down your paper to a board, using gel medium to glue your onto a board, and what kind of boards to glue it on. You know, because if you're going to glue onto a panel, what kind of panel do you glue them on? So I have all that on my YouTube channel. Just go in there, subscribe, and then when you're searching for something on my YouTube channel, don't search in the main thing. Search underneath there's a little magnifying glass that you got to search on to find only on my channel, basically.
And then I also
But
have a
yes,
question from
yes.
Karen. She's asking about how long this usually keeps on the palette. So how long are you using these for? And
Oh, when it comes to the gouache, it will dry a little bit more than like watercolors, but like I said, Holbein watercolor doesn't dry at all to a hard rock. This will dry a little bit harder, but what I do is they have these palettes, and I don't have one with me right at the moment. I should have had that. If you wait a second, I may run in there and grab one. And but they're pallets that are airtight and they have a silicone seal for them. And so you put them on and you spray it and they last forever. It's just that if you leave them out dry like this, they will dry to a not to a hard rock, but a little bit harder to rejuvenate. But if you have the panel of these, I have these little boxes, they're called transom. A lot of the art companies haven't made these yet because I don't think they were used for this, but one of the artists I met in at one of these plein air events was using it, and it's airtight, and so it lasts for a really long, makes your paint last for a really long time, your gouache anyways. And actually even your acrylic gouache, it also lasts on the acrylic gouache too. You just wet it before you close it, and you wet it before you close it, and then you just put it in there. And see, I'm putting a little yellow now. I just noticed that was a little bit too white. My reflection was a little bit too white, so I'm putting a little yellow in there, right over the top of the white. See, I'm just putting it right on top of there. So yes, it does last if you have a airtight container, and then you spray it, and it does rejuvenate, but not as well as the watercolors. Holbein watercolors are the best when it comes to. I tell my students is like get that paint because that does not dry to a hard rock, and it rejuvenates instantly. As soon as you add a little bit of water, it rejuvenates. It's just amazing. It's amazing that they what they did is they don't use oxgall. The oxgall is what makes the other paints kind of get hard. Though if I guess if you also put them in a container like that, that would be fine too. And while this is at a certain point, I'm gonna run into my other room here. I'm gonna show you one of those transom pellets. And I'll be right back, all right? We'll be right back. Let me just grab one of those pallets to show you. So the classes I teach, I bring these with, and it's just so you can see that it's a bunch of little rectangular shapes, a little palette, and it's got these four little latches, and it has a silicone seal. So I undo this, and then I open it up, and this is a silicone seal right here. And so I put all my gouache in there, and see this one's wet. This was one of my students had used it. I bring all my classes, my live classes, I bring most of my materials for all the students to use and try. And these have been used, forever. I don't add, I just add to them. I keep on adding to them and they stay wet forever. They don't dry out. And if they do dry out, I had left one open in my own. I've left open one a couple of times. I just re-wet it, sprayed it, put it back, closed it up again, and it was fine the next time I used it. So this I got on Amazon, but I'm not sure if some of the art clubs are going to start getting them. I think because I don't know of any other palettes that are like this. And actually, Holbein saw this, and I got a feeling they're going to make something like it sooner or later because it's just a great way of keeping your paints moist and wet. But speaking of Amazon, go to your local art stores first before you do that. And if the art store does have if they're selling through Amazon, then that's fine. But try to go to your art store. We don't want them to close. We do not want those art stores to close. And so first go to your art store, and they'll give you the price that I've asked a couple times when I've gone to some of the art stores and bought something, and I saw it a little cheaper online. They will match it. Usually they will match it right on. Not sure if Plaza Art does that, but I got a feeling they do. Because they want to stay in business, right? And so order from them, order from the art stores.
Thank you. Yes, we have the Stay Wet palette, which will work. It's not as airtight as the silicone one, but it has a wet layer so that it will keep it going for a lot longer. And there's a link in the chat, but I can resend that.
Cool.
This is Susan. Can I also say that I've been doing watercolor for many years, and I am totally devoted to Plaza Art. They have been more helpful and they have great products. So I just want to give them the plug, and I love these classes that they're giving.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Yes. Thank you all.
Yeah, I do workshops all around the country, and every time I go to any place in the area, I always tell the students in your area, keep those stores open, because in my area, nobody was using it, and a lot of times they'll close up. And what are you going to do then when you need something on the hurry? And just go to the art store first, try it first. And like I said, with the prices, just because it's maybe $1 more, ask them if they'll take the $1 off. Just you have to ask, though. I'm sure you have to ask, but they'll more times than not, they'll do it. Let me just show you a couple more things I want to show you. When it comes to, here is again a stencil. This is gouache, and using a stencil of musical notes, and this white of this is not the white of the paper, it's the white of the paint. And so a lot of times watercolorists really, trying to keep the white. Well, sometimes if you misplace that and you don't get the white of the paper, just go back in there with gouache and put it on there, and you're gonna do absolutely fine. It's gonna look absolutely fine. Again, you could not enter this into like the TWSA exhibit, but a lot of them you can. And this is on a sheet of the paper, and this is actually hot press. This is the hot press Aqua Stonehenge hot press. So it's a little bit harder to get soft edges, but if you're doing wet into wet, you can get that with gouache. So this is gouache back there. And so this is one of the ones I had done. I do, like I said, every Thursday night I do a paint along. And this is one of the paint alongs, and we're studying doing high key paintings. High key meaning that you keep the image very light and very light. And so most of it is light except for your center of interest, which is of course the cat's eye and his mouth, basically in his nose. Everything else is high key and light. And so then my dark is just that area, and my light of the whole thing would be just the edge of there and the flowers. And this was done with watercolor, but I added gouache at the very end for these little marks right here. And this was done on a panel. This was done on a panel. It says it's not paper. See, I can't bend it. So that was done on a panel. And this is also done 11 by 14, so I can throw it right into a frame. I will wax it. And before you do wax it or varnish it, make sure you sign it, because as a watercolor, as you can't put watercolor over that then. So always make sure you sign it first. Here's one done on a block. This is done on a block. So you can tell it's a block of paper. And I didn't have to take it off of the block. I kept it on there because I was doing this plein air. And this again is both watercolor and gouache. You may not see much gouache in there because I always do that for the end. And so the leaves, some of the leaves that are light on top of the darks are the gouache. The purple down here and the stones and stuff, those are gouache. And so I want to cover up areas. And these little leaves right here, those right there are gouache. Those are green, and white together. And so I just put them on with gouache. So most of it is watercolor, but what you don't have to not put gouache in there to get certain effects. It's just another way of enhancing your painting. You don't have to think of it as like, oh, I didn't get it, or I'm using it to just better it's an enhancement to the painting. And it's really, to use it as a plein air painter is wonderful, but it's just as good in the studio. It's all good, just because you're outside or inside it. It's all what kind of artist you are, wherever you want to paint. I used to paint on a train when I used to go down to downtown Chicago. I come from Chicago, and I used to go downtown every day, 50 miles north. And I used to take my watercolor palette with me. And, back then I wasn't thinking about gouache because gouache back then was very white. It was very white. It had a lot of whitening agent. It was very pastel. And I didn't like that. And I think most of the reason that they got a bad name, gouache, was because of that. Because it was very pastel looking, almost like tempera paint that your kids use in school. That's not the effect anymore. The gouache is just as bright, if not brighter, than some of the regular watercolors. It's really, really intense. And especially Holbein, I must say, because they do not use a whitening agent in their paints. They don't mix white in there to make it opaque. I'm not sure if I have anything else to do in my painting here. You guys see anything that I should mention in my painting here? Let me know. If you see something you don't like, let me know. Actually, I can put a little bit of yellow in here.
If you want, David, maybe in a couple minutes, we can do our share of everyone's pieces. So if you want to do a little more work, and then we can maybe in 5 minutes, anyone who wants to share what their work looks like, we can all share at the same time. Set the gallery view. I'll see.
If you would love to see it, it'd be great to see. I would love to see them. I'm putting a little light back here on this side here, making a little bit more waves. Lighting up a little bit. Giving a little bit more waves into the picture. And little highlights and things. Over here, you can actually like put in little way seeing through the trees. You can put little dots here and there for the seeing through the trees. If you feel like the land is too dark, you can put lighter colors on top of that too. If you want to make the rocks a little bit lighter, or you can just put it right on top of there. And actually, you can even float pigment on that too. Like I could put water down and float it right on top of the gouache, and that works too. The nice thing is that and if I want to take this out, let's say I want to take out and rub out something, I can do that also. So watch here. Let's say this is too dark and I want to just rub it out a little bit. Because it's not acrylic gouache, I can just rub it a little bit. And this paper, Holbein, or the Legion Stonehenge Aqua paper for watercolors is great because you can rub out. You can easily take your paint off the paper again. See how I'm just taking a little bit of rubbing it a little bit? And it doesn't absorb into the paper as much as some of the other papers do. It's just a different kind of feel to the paper, and the fact that you can. Now the only thing that I wouldn't recommend on this paper is masking fluid, because you have to use a heat to get it off of the paper, because sometimes it'll rip the paper. But that's why you're using gouache, so you don't have to use masking fluid, right?
Did not know that about the heat. That is a good thing to know. Little tip and tricks. David, were you going to show anything about the wax
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I'm sorry. There you go.
No, no.
So I'm gonna take this one I did before, and I'm gonna wax it for you. And so I'm gonna take first off and sign it, because if I don't sign it, then I won't be able to do that later. But real quickly, I'm just gonna go down here and sign my name.
I know
But
you
then-
guys did not get the wax in your sample kit, but it is nice to see how that's used.
All right, so there's signed. And so I won't wax on there yet because it's wet. But I use Dorland wax medium. And I'm sure Plaza Art has this. It's cold wax. It's called cold wax. And you can also use, I know, you can use a varnish. I'm sure they have a varnish there in Plaza Art that you can also spray on there, like a Krylon. Um, there's all different kinds. Just look it up for varnishes for watercolor. And so this is just cold wax, and it's basically a wax. And good thing I have gloves on, but you don't actually need to have a glove on. And because it's not super dangerous. You know, I wouldn't eat it, but it's wax basically. And so it's got resin in there and they'll harden. And I know some people that say that they spray their varnish first and then put the wax on it, which is a no-no, because I've talked to people who are in the chemical part of this, and they say the wax is combining into the pigment and making the pigment hard. So if you're putting a barrier between the varnish and the wax, you might as well not use the wax. You don't need to use the wax then. So I'm just going to dip in there and see I have it on my hand, on my glove, and I'm just going to take it and rub it into the painting. I'm just going to go like this and just rub it onto the paper, and it's not going to do anything. It's not wet. It's not going to ruin your gouache painting or your watercolor. It's just going to put it over that. And then I take a towel or take some Viva paper towel, and then just rub it into there like you're rubbing into just rubbing it down. You do not want it thick, not like varnish where you're putting a pile of varnish on top of it. It's not that at all. You're going to try to rub it so that you almost don't feel it, because it's going into the paint, it's going down in there, and chemically it's binding with the pigment and making it hard so that nothing can ever affect it. You know, it's just going in there, just rubbing it on. And the nice thing is that if water gets on there, it's gonna come off of there really easily. Now, depending, make sure your painting also is bone dry. It cannot even be a little bit damp or anything. It's got to be bone dry. And then you can, if you want it, it doesn't shine. It doesn't give it a shine because you're putting so much or so little bit on there. It's going into the paper that it'll still be matte. But sometimes it gives it kind of a more of a matte and even look to it, which I think is really kind of neat. Now, if you do want to shine, yes, you can get a shine too. What you need to do is let this dry. And it takes about, depending on your temperature and stuff, it could take a week to dry. It could take a couple of days to dry. Could take overnight to dry to where it's cured, and somebody told me that it takes a little bit longer to cure hard as a rock. It takes a little bit of time, like maybe a week, if you're a really damp area, maybe a month even. But then it's hard as a rock, and then it doesn't need to be. And what you do is you want it shiny, put another coat on top of that, really thin coat, and then little by little you get a couple coats on there, and then buff it. Then you'll buff it with your towels. You just buff it and make it nice and shiny. If you want it shiny, that's if you want it shiny. Otherwise, now it's protected, and right away it's protected. So I can frame this like right now, because I just did the top. Now I have to do the whole thing, but my name is still wet, so I don't want to go over that. But and if you feel it where it's tacky, that's too much, because that means that it's not going to dry really nice and it's not combining in there. It's too much of it on there. If you keep it there, you can buff it out and make it's going to get hard sooner or later, and then you buff it, but try not to put it on like a big thick layer. It's not about the thickness of it. It's about it penetrating into the paper. And so you're pushing it into the paper by rubbing it into the paper. So that's one thing I heard. And the cold wax is also used for some of these furniture paints. Like I know that Annie Sloan has like these furniture paints, and they use cold wax also. And that's who I learned from the science of it, is that it goes into the paint and combines with the paint. It's not that it's sitting on top and protecting it away from it. It's actually going into the pigment and combining with the pigment. All right, so that's how you cold wax. And that's it. I mean, that's pretty simple. It's almost as simple as spraying of the varnish too. The varnish now, when you're putting it on there, if you want it glossy, get a gloss of varnish. If you want a medium or matte, get a matte varnish. And then you just go right over it. Now, one thing I have to say is that if you're using a varnish, a spray varnish, you're also getting a little bit of UV protection, where wax does not give you any UV protection. So it's up to you what you want to use. And then when it comes to mounting the paper to the board, use a medium gel, like a gel medium. I mean, use an acrylic gel medium, because that's a barrier between it makes a barrier between your paper and your board, whatever board you're using. And there's many things you can use as a board. You could use plexiglass, you can use hardboard, like you get at Walmart, not Walmart, Menards and Home Depot. You can get Gator board and mount it to that, but use gel medium, because that's a barrier between the board and the paper. And you can also use this pH balanced glue to glue it down to a board. You can do that. And then what other information can I give you? Let's see. So that's waxing, gluing to the board. The frames, of course, when you're framing it, you're going to frame it without glass and without a mat. And so get yourself a really nice frame that's a little bit thicker. So on a plein air frame, the section like right next to the frame is like a mat board, but it ends up being, I can just show you one. I got one right here. So this is a frame. This is a frame that has like a mat on it. So this is a plein air frame. And so there's no glass on here. And you would, this is the part of the frame that normally like watercolors use, but this part looks like matte, right? But it's part of the frame. And so there's no glass here, and you can just put the watercolor right in there, and it's all perfectly fine. And you can get more money for it. Isn't that great?
I'm going to take this opportunity. If I'd like to invite everyone to share their pieces. If you want to, we'd love to see them. If you go to your view settings and change to gallery view, we can all see everyone's pieces. So I'll count to 3. Ready? That 1, 2, 3. So excited to see how different they're all going to look. Oh, they're so pretty.
Can you put that on the
Wow.
screen so we all can see, or?
I'm not able to share that for everyone, but if you are you able, well, we'll share some screenshots with you. I don't know if you can change your view to gallery view in Zoom. That's how we can view it. Oh, Susan, I can almost see. Can you shift yours to the center? Yeah. Oh, they look so great. I can't believe you guys did such beautiful work. That's so
Very
good.
nice.
This was really a good class. Really a good class. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Again, go subscribe to my channel right now. Go to Becker Art or davidarbecker.com on YouTube. Subscribe to my channel, and you can paint with me every week on Thursday night. We do this
Yeah.
every Thursday night.
And totally share with us. Like, we'd love to see what you guys do with David. Online, great with Plaza Art, hashtag, tag David in them so that he can see it too. We'd love to see your work. Any other last questions or anything coming up? About 3 minutes left. I did also like seeing the Dorland wax. I've heard about that technique for sealing. Hadn't seen it used before, so that's really cool.
How do you spell that?
Dorland.
Was that Dorland wax?
Yeah,
D-O-R-L-A-N-D.
D-O-R-L-A-N-D.
Okay. Thanks.
Dorland wax medium.
I think they put the link in the chat. Plaza
Yep,
does
the
sell it.
link. Yeah, it is in the chat. I'll add it to our featured supplies list for when we do the follow-up email tomorrow, so you can have access to it there. It's on our website. You can search it.
I
Right
assume if
there.
you could also use Gamblin cold wax.
Yes, yes, they also make a cold wax.
Okay, and I was
Just look for
curious
cold
about,
wax, basically.
right.
And oil painters use it to put in their paints, like in with their oil paints. So there's a lot of companies that do make cold wax. So just look for cold wax.
Also, I was just curious about some of the properties of, I see a lot of acrylic gesso, but is that just acrylic paint?
Acrylic
I mean, I'm
gesso.
sorry, acrylic gouache. I know that even Holbein makes an acrylic gouache.
Yeah, yeah, that's we were talking about. There's either acrylic gouache or and it's a matte kind of opaque paint.
Oh,
People
okay, and
love
it
the
has all the, yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
it has all the properties of acrylic paint, so you can't do a lot of the things you can do with regular gouache. Is that correct?
Actually, it's nice. You can do more because it's more opaque, so you can layers really well. You don't have to like a lot of the regular acrylics. They're like transparent or you can't cover things. Well, these are very opaque, and so one wash will cover anything. You know, it'll be
Oh,
like
good.
it's
Okay,
so a
thank
lot of
you.
the acrylic painters like the acrylic gouache better because it's like it's very covers really well.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Thank you.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, great. So we're pretty much at time. I thank you all for coming and sharing your work today. Thank you, David, for joining us today and showing us some great techniques with the Holbein Artists Gouache and the brush and the paper. We're excited to bring in those new panels mounted to the aluminum. Hope to see you again, and thank you to Legion and to Holbein for also helping coordinate this. I hope to see you all on the next one. Have a great rest of your day, guys. Bye.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks so much for coming there.
Thank you.